محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We begin in the name of Allah and ask Him to send His peace and blessings upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives and his family members and his companions and all those who follow their example till the day of judgment, praying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala includes us in their legacy. Allahumma ameen. So we're closing out with the major signs or the minor signs. What was the last one we discussed? Someone remind me? What was the last sign that we discussed? I didn't mark where we ended here, so I need you. Yes. I mentioned that one? No memory of that. What was the last one? Okay. I remember that one. I remember the wild animals about. I don't remember most of what I say, to be honest. Unfortunate. So, next sign, what number are you guys on? Curious to hear. 43, that sounds accurate. The Prophet ﷺ said in the Hadith of Abu Hurairah, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يمر الرجل بقبر الرجل فيقول يا ليتني مكانه. The hour will not come until a man will pass by the grave of another and say, I wish I was in his place. The scholars mentioned here, what's very interesting is that sometimes people wish for death, or they say, I wish I was dead, until they actually see it. Till they actually see a dead body, for example, or go to a janazah, or pass by the graves, then they snap out of it and say, no, I was being silly. But this is for real, that this person needs to move their car. This person needs to move their car. It's a picture of a picture. Wow, Inception. Bronco Sport LLY 9765. Bronco Sport LLY 9765. Please move your car. Yeah, it's very, very trippy. He's blocking you? Oh, because we would take care of it right now. He'd be in trouble. So they mentioned this is interesting because people snap out of it, they don't really mean it. But this person's passing by a grave and wishing that they were there. They're actually saying this and they really mean it. And they really wish that they're not grateful for their life, or, as some mentioned, it's not just ingratitude, but it's because of the intensity of the trials that they're going through. In the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, he said, سَيَأْتِي عَلَيْكُمْ زَمَانٌ لَوْ وَجَدَ أَحَدُكُمُ الْمَوْتِ يُبَاعَ لَاشْتَرَاهُ. It will come upon you a time that some of you, if they found death for sale, they'd purchase it. Like people just, they're either, again, ungrateful for their lives, or they are, because of the intensity of what they're going through, which is something that the Prophet ﷺ directly mentioned in another narration of the same hadith, of the same meaning, where he says, it will come upon the time for the people that they will wish for death or wish for the Dajjal to come. Like, let's just get it over with. And from the hadith that we'll get to probably in 2 weeks, we know that the advent of a Dajjal is the worst trial and tribulation to befall mankind. Something that's going to tear the world apart, and many people will lose their faith and fail this exam. So why are they wishing for that when they know about him? Because they're clearly wishing for it. It's just from their hastiness, right? It's from their impatience. And that's why he told us, ﷺ, لا يتمنى أحدكم الموت إما محسنا فلعله يزداد وإما مسيئا فلعله يستعتب. Don't wish for death. Don't wish for death, because if someone is good, what's going to happen? It's an increase. You do more good deeds. You're a good person. Then what's better than another year of Ramadan, another year of good deeds, of sadaqah, of prayer? And he said if he's evil, then it's an opportunity that maybe they'll wake up. If not now, maybe later. So never wish for death. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills it, this is by His will, but there's no reason for you to rush and be impatient. If you are someone, again, that's doing good, you do more good deeds. Someone who is not so good, you have an opportunity to repent and fix your life. And things can always be worse. A lot of times people ask, can it get any worse than this? The answer is always, yes, it can. Always. In terms of your personal life, in terms of what's going on in the world, yes, it could always get worse. Period. It's just an objective fact. It could be worse. There's always something in your situation that can be worsened or be amplified in how it's affecting you or harming you. So why would you ever wish for the worst of situations? It's something that is not in line with the teachings of our Messenger ﷺ. So that was the last sign that we wanted to cover we're supposed to cover last week, but now we're getting to the signs of this week, which is the final signs of the end. And as many scholars have said, these are the only signs that have not yet occurred, of the minor signs. But it's not really relevant because all of them are occurring simultaneously with the major signs. So it's not a must that all the minor signs are finished before the major signs begin. The major signs were described as 10 of them, which we'll get to starting next week. They're especially catastrophic. They're especially rushed in terms of how they are consecutive. One of them follows the other. But during these major signs, some of the minor signs still occur at the same time. So every single one that we'll mention now is either simultaneous or after the advent, the beginning of major signs. So the first one of them that we'll mention, or number 44 according to some of you, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ وَالرُّومُ أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ. The hour will come and the Romans are the most of people. They're the majority. So the word Rum, to keep it brief, it was used to generally refer to anybody from the Roman Empire from that ethnicity. So Latins, people who spoke Latin, so generally from, they covered a huge area, right? They had conquered very large swaths of land, and they ran a huge part of the world, a large part of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, a large part of Europe as well. So they were a huge society. They don't exist today in their proper name, like the Roman society. It's not really something that exists today. It's not talking about Rome, the city, right? But as a civilization, as an ethnicity that once existed, it's kind of been divided amongst many people, like who? Who? United States is a difficult thing to say because the United States is filled with brown people like you guys. So like, I wouldn't call you guys Romans even though you're United States citizens, but yeah. Huh? So Italy, okay. Southern Europe, for sure. Parts of Europe. What else? Where did these people spread out and where did they conquer and then their ethnicity kind of dissolved? So a lot of the things, say it again. Scandinavia might be too far. Yes. Huh? So there's definitely remnants of them in Spain, in all over European countries, in Britain, Greece for sure, Italy, those areas for sure. The United States has a lot of them. And I hesitate to say white people because it's definitely not just white people. It's a very bland or general word that doesn't really match one culture, right? It covers a lot. So it's definitely not accurate to say that. But as an ethnicity, they've kind of spread through huge parts of the world. The United States, the UK, Australia, Spain, France. So a lot of times people will translate it as the West in general because they are the descendants of them ideologically, but that's not entirely accurate either. But for sure, ideology-wise, the West has been championing the Roman ideals for a long time, right? It's a big part of a lot of the laws and the way of life that people have. So these are all possibilities, but the bottom line is the hadith here is telling us that they will be the majority of people. Where does everyone else go? Where do you go? What do you think? Where are you guys going to go? You and your ethnicities and your families. Any suggestions? Back home? No, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the hour will come and they're the majority of people. I mean, maybe. Why I got to be so pessimistic for? He said they're the most of people, so other people are gone. So most likely dead. Yeah, that's the answer. I mean, possible. We don't know for sure. We don't know for sure, right? There's always the possibility of other details, but this hadith is just at face value. In a longer hadith, he said that there will be a truce between you and Bani al-Asfar. Bani al-Asfar are the same ethnicity, right? The Romans. So they were called, Bani al-Asfar translates into yellow people, so their skin was described more as yellow than white. In fact, when someone was described as white in the hadith or in that culture, they usually meant like a really light brown. So that's what people used to call white in their culture. If they said someone was abyad, then it would refer to a light wheatish brown, while Bani al-Asfar is what they referred to the Latins and what we would call white people. So he said there will be a truce between you and them, and then they will break that truce, and then they will attack you under 80 banners, each banner containing 12,000 soldiers. So these are other hadith that are indicating what people call Armageddon, right? The final battles of the end times, which you'll find in every single eschatology, every single study of the end times in all religions, right? This is something that happens, the showdown between good and evil, which is how it can be boiled down to. He mentioned, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in several hadith that the scholars have put together that there will be an exceptionally huge battle. and that there will be Romans on both sides. Romans in the meaning here, I don't mean people from Rome. And there will be Romans on both sides, the Muslim side and the Kafir side. And the battle will be for several days on end. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it will be so severe such that a bird passing by will fall dead. Imagine like a bird passing by, something hits it. It's not safe to pass by this entire area. That's how large scale this war will be. And the Muslims will face off with these other groups of Romans, and then when they face off with one another, they will demand from them what? Give us those from our own ethnicity who turn to your side. Hand over the Romans, our own people, who have sided with you, who are amongst you, so we can deal with them, because they're traitors to the cause. And then he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Muslims will refuse. Because it's not about ethnicity. It's not about the color of your skin. It's not about the language that you speak. The bond that our deen offers us supersedes family, supersedes blood, supersedes ethnicity. And if it is two-pronged or three-pronged, meaning it's someone who's your family and a Muslim, then the relationship is multiplied. But if it's push comes to shove, things clash with one another, what gets dropped? Everything but Islam. If anything comes in the face of this deen, it all gets dropped. Family, ethnicity, business relations, nationality. If the dividing marker between you and someone, the dividing conflict is in case of deen, then the deen comes first. In the battle of Badr, the brother of Mus'ab ibn Umayr is taken as a captive. He was fighting on the side of the mushrikeen. And as he's passing by, he's being led by one of the Ansar, the people of Medina, as a captive. Mus'ab says, pull his bonds tight. His mother's rich. He's going to get a hefty ransom. So Mus'ab's brother turns to him and he says, I'm your brother. That's your advice regarding your brother? Like that's what you have to say to this man about your own brother? And he points to the Ansari man. He says, he is my brother before you are. You chose the wrong side. Not just disbelief, but to fight Islam, to come to Medina trying to kill people. This bond has dissolved. And my allegiance and loyalty is to this fellow Muslim who's on my side today over you. That's how it works. Muslims don't rush to do this. Don't rush to cut people off. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to show kindness and consideration for non-Muslims in general, least of all their family members. But again, when this clash happens, you know what you have to pick. So they say, hand over these people, we will deal with them, and the Muslims refuse. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Muslim akhul Muslim, la yadhlimuhu wa la yuslimuhu. The Muslim is the brother of their fellow Muslim. He doesn't oppress him, he doesn't hand him over to be harmed. La yuslimuhu means he does not hand him over to someone who wants to harm him. These are integral parts of being a Muslim that the world could use, the Muslim Ummah could use a lot more of. من كان في حاجة أخيه كان الله في حاجته ومن فرج عن مسلم كربة فرج الله بها عنها كربة من كرب يوم القيامة. The rest of the hadith says, and if a Muslim, whoever is fulfilling the needs of their brother, their fellow brother, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fulfill their needs. And whoever relieves a fellow Muslim of some hardship or some distress, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will relieve them of distress on the Day of Judgment. وَمَنْ سَتَرَ مُسْلِمًا سَتَرَهُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. And whoever conceals the sins of a Muslim, Allah will conceal his sins on the Day of Judgment. We don't have expose culture in our deen. We don't rush to expose people or to post them or to try to catch them in an awkward, compromising position. We go out of our way to hide that. That's one of the rights of the Muslim upon their fellow Muslims. Even if they don't deserve it. Even if I don't see like, well, why should I do that for them? Because I want Allah to hide my sins on the Day of Judgment. I don't want to be exposed because the default is that everyone will be exposed. يَوْمَئِذٍ تُعْرَضُونَ لَا تَخْفَى مِنْكُمْ خَافِيَةٌ. On that day you'll be exposed, you'll be exhibited in front of all to see what you did and said. Not a single hidden thing will remain hidden. يَوْمَ تُبْلَى السَّرَائِرُ. On the day that all secrets are blown up for all to see. Except those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does set for. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst them. Allahumma ameen. He says in this epic battle, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Muslims will receive a special contingent of Muslims from Medina who will come and aid them. And in this epic battle that we've been describing with the Romans, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَيُهْزَمُ ثُلُثٌ لَا يَتُوبُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَبَدًا. 1/3 will turn and flee the battle. They'll flee in fear, and Allah will never accept their tawbah. Fleeing the battlefield is one of the most deadly, severe sins in Islam. For somebody to run in fear or cowardice at this moment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it out in the Quran, except for someone who's doing a tactic, right? A false retreat or something of this notion that has happened all throughout history, some kind of war tactic. But for someone to abandon their post, to flee out of fear or cowardice or protection of their life, is something that's been forbidden in this deen. This deen is not a deen of cowards. So he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even though it's a major sin, people did it. For example, on the day of Uhud, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave them all. And he mentioned their forgiveness in the Quran. So it's not an unforgivable sin, but in this particular situation, in this epic battle at the end times, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the third that flees, Allah will never forgive them ever. That sin will be in their necks forever till the day of judgment. And then he said, وَيُقْتَلُ ثُلُثُهُمْ أَفْضَلُ الشُّهَدَاء عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. And a third of them will die, and they will be the best of martyrs ever in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيُفْتَحُ الثُّلُث لَا يُفْتَنُونَ أَبَدًا. And then 1/3 of them will be victorious, and they will never suffer a tribulation after that again. Their deen is solid forever, till they die. Bad things will still happen, as we'll see, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, you're the champions. So 1/3, 2/3 of them come out okay. Right, 1/3 are martyrs, the best of martyrs of all history. 1/3 are victorious. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect them from ever being put through trial again, and the worst of trials is just about to happen. And then the 1/3 that flees, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never forgive them. And he said they continue until they conquer Constantinople. Where's Constantinople? It's Istanbul, right? It's the modern city of Istanbul. Istanbul is a Muslim city. How are they going to conquer a Muslim city? They can go back to Christians? I hope not. What do you guys think? You guys are takfiri. So a lot of the scholars have said a lot. First of all, there's a lot of interpretations that believe this to be the initial conquest of Constantinople, which was in 1453. But that's not possible because the rest of the hadith says right after that the Dajjal comes. So that can't be it. And there's other hadith that indicate the times are completely different. So some scholars have said that will go back to kufr, that will be conquered by non-Muslims again. Because there's another hadith that indicates that the conquerors themselves will be Romans. The Muslim conquerors. So those who come to conquer it will be Romans. And those who initially conquered it were not of the Roman ethnicity. They were Turks. Turkic people. Not modern day Turkic people. So the people who initially conquered it were not Romans. And some hadith indicate at the end times that those who conquer it will be Romans. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they conquer it, which is the next sign, I kind of jumped ahead. But he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when they get to its gates, they will stand in front of it. And he mentioned that they're from Bani Ishaq. Bani Ishaq are the Romans. Right? Bani Ismail are the Arabs. So they're not Arabs, they're Romans in their ethnicity according to this hadith. He says when they stand in front of it, they don't raise a single weapon, but they make takbir and the city falls to their hands. So if they stand in front of it and they make takbir, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause it to be conquered through that fashion. Which is not something far-fetched. This has actually happened in our history. Where Muslim armies advance upon somewhere and through some kind of ruse, some kind of troops enter onto enemy lines. They make takbir and then the enemy surrenders. Like, oh no, how'd they get in here? So, back then it was dark and stuff. So people couldn't just pull out their phone, put on their flashlight to see what's going on. Completely dark. They hear takbirat from the wrong side, like way behind them. So they say, oh, they're advanced that far, they give in and they give up. They submit. That's happened actually numerous times in our history, so it's not far-fetched, even though this hadith doesn't give that much detail, but he says they will conquer it without raising a weapon, but through their takbir and the city will fall. So a lot of these details are not super specific. How will the Romans be the Muslims and leading the Muslim front? That's not specific of how it will happen, but it's not weird at all. Islam has changed hands numerous times since its inception. Right? The Arabs were carrying it. The Arabs, the original Sahaba with Rasulullah ﷺ and the people around them, and the Tabi'een that became Muslim, that continued for how long? Barely a century. Barely 100 years where they were the forefront, raising the flags of jihad and Islam and leading the ummah. Slightly over 100 years later, it gets transferred over, and then it gets transferred over again. In fact, for the majority of our history, it was the Turkic people. People from the Russian steppes and modern day countries of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, they ran the ummah's affairs for the majority of its history. For maybe 1,000 years. Officially and unofficially at first, and then officially later. Where that the rest of the ummah simply followed their politics, followed their decisions, followed their warfare, and that the rest of the ummah took the back seat, the far back seat, for the vast majority of our history. So Arab relevance was maybe the first 2 centuries, and then it dwindled down from the 2nd to 3rd century, and then since the 3rd century it has been an absolute minimum, at least in the political and the warfare for sure. In scholarship, they're still there, but even then, overtaken by other ethnicities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ ثُمَّ لَا يَكُونُوا أَمْثَالَكُمْ. If you turn back, if you're not taking it seriously, if you're not as committed, He'll simply replace you. He doesn't need you. He doesn't need your people. He doesn't need your ethnicity. He doesn't need your language. He will replace you with others, and they will not be like you. They're not going to be like you. They're not going to make the same mistakes, and they won't be dragging their feet in the same way that you do. So it's something that is not new to our deen. So after this epic battle with the Romans, we kind of jumped around to different signs, but it's okay. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as they're hanging up their swords on trees of olive, the shaitan will call out amongst them, إِنَّ الْمَسِيحَ قَدْ خَلَفَكُمْ فِي أَهْلِكُمْ, that the Dajjal has now appeared in your homes, amongst your families. So they will confer amongst themselves, and they will head towards Ash-Sham. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep it liberated and a shining light for this ummah. Allahumma ameen. And as they head over there, he said it will turn out to be false, that the Dajjal has not appeared. And by the time they get there, and there's some certain cities that are mentioned specific, for example, the city of Dabiq is mentioned, but when they get to this general area, then Dajjal will come out for real. He will actually appear, and he will appear from the east. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. And he says when they get there, they will stand in prayer, and Isa ibn Maryam alayhi salam will descend upon them at that moment. We'll get to that next week as well, inshallah. Conquest of Constantinople, we already kind of spoke about that, where it's mentioned that it will be part of the final wars of the end times. It will be conquered by Romans themselves, who are themselves Muslims. It will be conquered by takbir. I was really hoping someone would say Allahu Akbar. That'd be funny, but it didn't happen. Any questions? So far, go ahead, Yusuf. What kind of car is this? Me neither. HKM 7769. It's silver. HKM 7769. Thank you. Keep them coming. I love this. What's your question? Yes. It's a very large ethnic group that has spread in several countries of the world. Doesn't necessarily have to be Italians. Yeah. You missed the first few minutes? So that's what we spoke about. We spoke about the Roman ethnicities, not necessarily people from Rome, Italy. It's people from, it was used to refer to a very large ethnicity, very large parts of the world that were conquered by them and they inhabited. So a lot of today's descendants would come from them. Spain, Italy, France, some of America, of course, some of a bunch of countries in Europe. So it's a very large ethnicity in the way that it was met from the Hadith and from those times. That's why using the word Romans is kind of tricky, because you're going to think of Rome, Italy. That's not what it's talking about at all. And it's not talking about the Western Roman Empire particularly. It's talking about both the Western Roman and the Eastern Roman, because they were all called Rome. So that you're talking about like a, modern day, they inhabited tens of countries. So the ethnicity is kind of, some have said it's the Latin people particularly, which again would still lead us to a lot of the English-speaking world. So it's not entirely clear, but it's definitely for sure large swaths of people. So how are they the majority? Where does everyone go? Could possibly be killed. Nuclear war, maybe. It's not mentioned. I'll leave it to your imagination and whatever favorite genre of dystopian movie you like. Whatever happens, happens. So, in one hadith, where one of the Sahaba was talking about تَقُومُ السَّاعَةُ وَالرُّومُ أَكْثَرُ النَّاسِ, the same hadith we were talking about, Amr ibn al-As heard him and he responded and he said, "What are you saying? What are you saying there'll be the most of people? Where did you get this?" And the man responded, "I got this from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm not making it up." And this was a conversation they were having. So he's saying, "I didn't make it up. It was something I heard directly from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam." So Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, he told him, if this is true, then it's because of these four qualities that they have. He said first, إِنَّهُمْ لَأَحْلَمُ النَّاسِ عِنْدَ فِتْنَةٍ. They are the most persevering and patient, forbearing in the face of trial. They push through difficult times, basically. وَأَسْرَعُهُمْ إِفَاقًا بَعْدَ مُصِيبًا. And they're quick to recover from calamities. And then he said, and they're quick to return after a loss in a battle. Right? Militarily, this is their strategy, that they could be pushed back and then they'll come back immediately. They're all very similar things, as you could see. And then he said, very interestingly, وَخَيْرُهُمْ لِمِسْكِينَ وَيَتِيمَ وَضَعِيفٍ. And they're the best of people that show kind treatment to the needy and the orphan and the weak. And I'll add a fifth one. He said, وَأَمْنَعُهُمْ مِنْ ظُلْمِ الْمُلُوكِ. And they're the least to accept subjugation and oppression by their kings. So maybe he doesn't look like the modern day Romans, that a lot of these things don't apply to them, but some of them do historically. And it's very interesting because he's highlighting their good qualities, right? Things that we should encourage people about. We should encourage them and remind them of their history. These are good qualities that your nation was supposedly founded on, are supposedly things that we all profess and agree on. So how about we actually implement them? And there's no good quality except that will be augmented by Islam. And it's there's a strategy that we should do with people. Right? Just because people are non-Muslim, for example, doesn't mean that your job is to drive them into the ground or deny any positive attributes that they have. But build on those, and there's no better building on it through Islam. And he's saying if this is something that's to happen, it's going to be through these four qualities that they generally have that he observed in his interactions with them. We already mentioned that they will have a back and forth between others who are Romans in the Muslim army, and they will be refused to be handed over. It's repeated here just to mention because it has a specific manifestation in this conquest of Constantinople, or the second conquest of Constantinople. If it's a literal one and there's room for different interpretation, it's not something that we would know until it happens. The next sign is warfare with the Jewish people. I hope this is being recorded. It's a specific context that is mentioned because he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they will be in the army of who? Whose army will they be in? It's the army of Ad-Dajjal, the Antichrist. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they will join him. They're waiting for their Messiah, right? Their Messiah already came. It was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But they denied him because he's not from their ethnicity and he's not from their tribe. So they say, no, not this one. We're waiting for another one. We're waiting for our actual Messiah, our messenger, and he'll come. They said it was some guy like 40 years ago. He died, so that was a dud, right? Some of them still say he's the Messiah, even though he's gone now. I don't know how it works. Maybe he's going to come back in their belief. Who knows? But then when the Dajjal comes, they'll say this is the Messiah, and they'll all follow him. So it's mentioned that that they will gather and then they will fight the Muslims in an organized fashion. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا تقوم الساعة حتى يقاتل المسلمون اليهود فيقتلهم المسلمون حتى يختبئ اليهودي من وراء الحجر والشجر فيقول الحجر والشجر يا مسلم يا عبد الله هذا يهودي خلفي فتعال فاقتله. It will continue to the point where they will hide behind trees and stones that will expose them, that there is a Jew behind me, and then the Muslim will come, telling the Muslim, come fight him, come kill him. A lot of times people will take this hadith and say, wow, look, your deen is insane. You want to kill Jews. Islam approves of a Holocaust. And how do you answer that? So the first thing is when the Dajjal comes, right, the Antichrist comes, the side of pure evil, that will be subjugating all mankind. You either believe in him and adhere to him or you die. And they join that side. Is that not objectively evil? Like what's the explanation there, right? What's the type of factor that could make this. No, it's okay. It's just difference of opinion. It's not what's happening. This is the end times where the Dajjal, the Antichrist, who's claiming divinity, will be on one side, killing all those who oppose him on the other. So opposing these people, in this case, like we said weeks ago, and we'll continue to say, there's nothing squeamish about physical force. It's about when is it justified, and what are the standards of waging physical force, warfare. And there's no one on either front except they get a huge epic F, except for the deen of Islam. When warfare is to be waged and how. There's no nation, there's no religion, there's no way of life, there's no historical general that will live up to the standards that this deen has. We don't fight for wealth, we don't fight for property, we don't fight for land. It's for the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for justice, to rid the world of oppression. And any Muslim who ever, because there's plenty till today, who did not do that, they're in the wrong and they'll answer for on the Day of Judgment. The seriousness of spilling unlawful blood or waging unlawful warfare is one of the worst of sins. It's one of the worst of oppression. And in fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, you encounter Muslims like that, you are allowed to wage war against them to stop their oppression. So that's in terms of the standard of why warfare is waged. And then in the manner of warfare, as the Prophet ﷺ taught, and as Abu Bakr would tell to the exiting army that would leave Medina, and Umar would do likewise, and every other of the Sahaba, the standards that they would place on their army is something that no other country, again, no other deen, no other way of life had. Things like there is no killing of a retreating soldier. There is no killing of a woman or a child or an old man. There's no cutting down of a tree. There's no breaking down of a home or a house of worship without any due right. The amount of things the amount of rules and the characteristics of Muslim warfare as it should be waged is something that no other nation, no other historical context lives up to. So besides just the Dajjal, there's also in these wars, these end time wars, who's on the other side of the Dajjal, who's fighting against him? It's al-Mahdi and Isa alayhi salam. So this is the second coming of Jesus that we'll talk about next week. He's literally on the other side. So if someone were to wage war against him, a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's their justification again for that? Right, so it's not, they always want to make it out into something that is clearly not the case. That's the second point. The third point, yes, go ahead, Akhi. So the 70,000 Jews are mentioned that they exit from a certain city in following the Dajjal. That they exit from the city, which is in modern day Iran, and they go out to follow Dajjal. So it's not necessarily that the whole army is 70,000, but just that specific city where 70,000 of them will exit to follow him, to be his followers. So one is that Dajjal is the opponent here, and everyone who's supporting him is on that side. Number two is the other side is Isa alayhi salam in his second coming with all of his signs as foretold by other religions. So clear good and evil. Another thing is, number three is that, and I should have started with this, that I told you, the questions and these type of arguments come from the people with the bloodiest hands. Just tell them, wipe the blood off your mouth before you speak to me, before you bring up any type of question that you have. The amount of injustice and the body count that their culture has, that their armies have for the most unjust of reasons, you don't even have the right to speak. You have no right to even ask these kind of questions. We'll still answer them because it's part of our deen and we understand why. But with that being said, these people have the audacity to bring up any of these questions or any of these points when their history, forget their history, when their present is what it is today. That any single person that has an iota of dissent against their world order or the way that they run their governments or they run their economies, right, they send freedom to them in a huge package immediately. Or they subjugate their country. Or they cause revolution after revolution, coup after coup, assassination after assassination. That's all that modern US history is. Modern British history. So don't ever lend them an ear. Don't ever give them any type of leeway to say, well, let me consider your points. It's all nonsense. It's all pure hypocrisy. And none of it lives up to the standards of our deen. So that was number three. Number four is, like I said before, it's eschatology. It's the end times. The end of the world. Look up what any tradition has that's going on at that time. It's all the same. It's all warfare. It's all truth versus evil. So this is the end times, the end of the world. There's a whole science of it called eschatology. If you look it up for Christian eschatology, Jewish eschatology, Hindu eschatology, it's all going to be the same thing. This is what everyone believes the world is headed to, the final showdown between good and evil. Whose fault is it that they're on the side of evil, right? That's the choice that they're going to make at the time. The Prophet ﷺ said that when Isa ﷺ returns, and again we'll talk about this more next week, that there'll be an abolishment of the jizya. People won't have the choice. Because this is the Prophet of Allah here, who has his signs, who is, again, it's clear good and evil at that time. People will simply choose and they will go to either side. Any questions before we move on for this very quickly? There's a couple of these points that have to do with Isa alayhi salam, so I'm going to skip over them just because we will get to that next week when we speak about his advent and his showdown with the Dajjal. There's also mentioned that the army of the Dajjal will besiege the army of al-Mahdi, the Muslims at the time, and they'll be besieged in Jerusalem, in Bayt al-Maqdis. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free it. Allahumma ameen. The next sign, he mentions, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that of the signs of the Day of Judgment is that Medina will be emptied. And there's a couple of hadith about this that show that it's a different, happens probably maybe over stages or of different time periods. But one of them, he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, يَأْتِي عَلَى النَّاسِ زَمَانٌ يَدْعُ الرَّجُلَ إِبْنَ عَمَّهُ وَقَرِيبَهُ هَلُمَّ إِلَى الرَّخَاء وَالْمَدِينَةُ خَيْرٌ لَهُمْ وَلَوْ كَانُوا يَعْلَمُونَ والذي نفسي بيده لا يخرج منهم أحد رغبة عنها إلا أخلف الله فيها خيرا منه. The hour will not come until a man will call upon his cousin and his relative, they're people from Medina, and he'll say, let's go, there's luxuries, there's things to enjoy outside of this city, we will seek it. And Medina is better for them at that time if only they knew. I swear by the one in whose hands is my soul, none of them will exit Medina being dissatisfied with it, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace him with someone better. أَلَا إِنَّ الْمَدِينَةِ كَالْكِيرِ يَخْرُجُ الْخَبَثِ. Medina is like an oven, a blacksmith's oven, that expels all filth. And the hour will not come until Medina expresses all of its filth. Or expels all of its filth. Expels all of its filth, all of the things that don't deserve to be there. Scholars had a few opinions about this. Is it the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Because anyone who'd come to Medina and then changed their mind, that was a hypocrite, right? Someone that went back on their deen. Like the man who came to Rasulullah ﷺ and he told him, Aqilni. He's basically saying, resolve me of my oath, that I will be standing by your side, that I will believe in you, that I will be here. I want to go back home. So the Prophet ﷺ says, Inna al-Islam la yuqal. There's no receipt on this. That's not how it works. This is a commitment. This is your life purpose. You can't just cancel it off. You can't just shut it down and say, I'm not interested anymore. There's plenty of people who accepted Islam but didn't come to Medina. They didn't make hijrah. They were still in their tribes. They didn't take the same oath as everyone else. But now you took an oath. You shook the hands of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. Now you just want to go home and what? Be a shepherd or plant stuff? That's not how it works at all. You're committed now and you gave an oath of allegiance. You can't just go back on it. So he repeated this 3 times and when Rasulullah refused, he left anyway. He said, I'm done with this. This deen's too much. There's sickness in Medina. We're being besieged by people left and right. We're losing our alliances. I miss my family. So he gave up and he left. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Medina is like an oven, similar to the narration we just heard, is like an oven of a blacksmith. It expels the filth. A lot of the scholars have said this is particular in the time of Dajjal because of a hadith that adds to it. ثُمَّ تَرْجُفُ الْمَدِينَةِ بِأَهْلِهَا ثَلَاث رَجَفَاتٍ فَيُخْرِجُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ كُلَّ كَافِرٌ وَمُنَافِقٍ. The Medina will shake at that time 3 times because the Dajjal can't enter Mecca and Medina, as we'll get to. He's not allowed to enter these holy sanctuaries. And Medina will shake 3 times and every hypocrite, every disbeliever will exit to join him. The fulfillment of this sign in totality will be at the very end times. And as many scholars have said, this will be even after the time of Isa alayhi salam, after the time of al-Mahdi, where Medina will be empty in its totality. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, تَتْرُكُونَ الْمَدِينَةَ عَلَى خَيْرِ مَا كَانَتْ لَا يَغْشَاهَا إِلَّا الْعَوَافِي. You will leave Medina, it will be abandoned despite it being as good as ever, as beautiful as ever. And anyone who has been to Medina knows the special merit of this city, the special feeling that you get walking through it and attending its prayers and joining any type of activity in that city has a special feel that anyone who's been there will know. So to hear these hadith are especially mind-boggling, that it will be abandoned by people willingly, that they will choose to leave. And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it will belong to the wild animals. It will belong to the wild animals. He said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, حتى يدخل الكلب أو الذئب فيقضي على بعض سواري المسجد أو على المنبر, until a wild dog or a wolf will enter into the masjid. The masjid will still be there. It will still exist. It will just be a ghost town. And a wild dog will enter until he urinates on the walls or on the minbar itself. They asked him, O Messenger of Allah, who will care about its crops at that time? He said, it will be to the wild animals and the birds. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect al-Medina and keep it shining brightly in our ummah. Allahumma ameen. Ibn Kathir says this is at the time after Dajjal, after Isa alayhi salam, after he dies, and the worst of people will be left on earth, such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not even being worshipped. So this is a possibility that will reach this point at that time, and unlikely before that, but it's possible as well. In another hadith he said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Imranu Bayt al-Maqdis kharabu Yathrib, that when Jerusalem is being established and settled by the Muslims, that will be the end of Yathrib, the city of Medina. That will lead to the end of Yathrib, and the end of Yathrib will be the advent of a Dajjal. So this gives us a different timeline. He said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, لَيَسِيرَنَّ الرَّاكِبُ بِجِنِبَاتِ الْمَدِينَةِ ثُمَّ لَيَقُولَنَّ لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي هَذَا حَاضِرٌ مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ كَثِيرٌ. The rider will come to the outskirts of the city of Medina, and he will say, once upon a time between the walls of this city were a lot of Muslims. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never allow us to see such a time. Of the last of the minor signs, and again these for sure happen after the beginning of the major signs. One of them is a breeze that will take the soul of all the Muslims. And we'll get into details about these end times when we speak about Isa alayhi salam next week. But this will be after Ad-Dajjal is killed, and after that peace is prevalent in the land, as we'll talk about al-Mahdi right now. And Double Parker? So let them tow him. His problem, not mine. I'm busy. NYPD is going to tow you. HKM 77495, something like that. So, he mentioned, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that towards the end times, it will be, Islam will be prevalent, there will be justice, there will be peace on earth. And then, at the very end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause a breeze that will either come from al-Yemen or al-Sham. There's narrations about both. And it will take the souls of all the believers of that time. And the only people who will remain will be hypocrites, people who will profess belief just because that's the way that the current went. And then they will be the last people on earth. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and they will be the فَلَا يَبْقَ عَلَى وَجْهِ الْأَرْضِ أَحَدٌ فِي قَلْبِهِ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ مِنْ خَيْرٍ أَوْ إِيمَانٍ. There will not be a single person left on earth that in his heart or her heart is a mustard seed's weight of faith or of goodness, except that they will be gone. And the last of people, he said, will be the worst of people. They will resume idol worship, and they will engage in sexual intercourse in the streets the way that the donkeys do. And the best of them, the most righteous of them at that time, meaning the person who has the most morals, will say, if only you took it somewhere privately behind that wall or something. So they will reach a level of debauchery and abasement that has not really occurred in society to that extent where that is the norm. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect all of us. The next and final sign that will cover the minor signs before we speak about al-Mahdi, for a total of about 50, if I've been counting correctly. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, also at this time is that there will be the destruction of the Kaaba. That the Kaaba itself will be destroyed. It will be a time in which the city is empty of Muslims, void of Muslims worshipping. No one is even worshipping there anymore. It's not being taken care of. And he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that it will, ثُمَّ يَخْرُجُ. First he said, لَا يَسْتَحِلُّ الْبَيْتَ الْحَرَامِ إِلَّا أَهْلُهُ. وَأَهْلُهُ meaning al-Muslimun. To tell us something very important here. He says, no one will violate the sanctity of this city except Muslims themselves. No one will come to war against this city. It's another prophecy that he's telling us, except Muslims themselves. And that's something that you will see all throughout history. This city was never attacked by a non-Muslim force. There's no non-Muslim army that ever made it to Mecca and attacked it. But there's several Muslim ones throughout history. There are several Muslim ones who attacked the city and even at times led to the accidental destruction of the Kaaba. That they broke its walls and it had to be rebuilt. This is not foreign in our history. It's not many times, but it happened a few times. We're our own worst enemy. That he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that it is something that no one will violate the sanctity of, no army will reach except its own people, meaning the Muslims themselves. Then he said, فَإِذَا اسْتَحَلُّوهُ فَإِنَّهُمْ يُصِيبُهُمُ الْهَلَاكِ. And when they do that, they will be destroyed. This is a general prophecy and specific about the end times. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in another hadith, that it will be a civil war between the three sons of a khalifa, the three sons of a ruler, fighting over their father's inheritance, fighting over the right to rule, and they will go to war in this area, right? And it will lead to their destruction as they violate the sanctity of the haram and the sanctity of the Kaaba. And he said, when that happens, فَلَا يُسْأَلُ عَنْ هَلَكَةِ الْعَرَبِ. Don't even ask about the Arabs and their destruction. That's it, it's imminent. It is something that is going to happen. And when that happens and this place deteriorates now, and the Muslims all die off, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ثُمَّ تَأْتِي الْحَبَشَ ثُمَّ تَأْتِي الْحَبَشَ. Then the Abyssinians will come, an army from Abyssinia, which is modern day like Ethiopia and that whole area, Somalia, that used to be the empire of Abyssinia. Then he said they will destroy it. لَا يُعَمَّرُ بَعْدَهُ أَبَدًا. And it will never be rebuilt after that. That will be the very end of the Kaaba as a structure. And then he said, وَهُمْ يَسْتَخْرِجُونَ كَنْزَهُ. And they will take its treasures. They'll divide it up amongst themselves. He mentioned specifically that I see the man, I've been shown the man that is the first to take it apart. And he described him as those suwayqatayn, the man with very small shins. He's in another hadith, he says he's bow-legged. You know, people whose legs, they arc outwards and they can't walk properly. So it's someone who is defective or deficient in their physical stature. He's also mentioned other hadith as being bald, small-headed. He's not someone notable. That's what the hadith is telling us. He's someone who is physically deficient. Someone who is physically crippled to a certain extent. It's not some big general that will come and bully everyone. It's that it's so uncared for, it's so unfrequented, that someone like this will come to do it. What's the significance of him being from Habasha, Abyssinia? There's a sign in this. What's the sign? Yeah, Zach. That's true, but that's not the context here. It could be that sometimes people consider them less than. But at the time, especially of the hadith, Habasha was an empire. It was a kingdom that was more impressive than the Arabs, so maybe not. There's another connection. Yeah, Rami. Okay. There's one about the Habasha as well. It's specifically mentioned? There's a hadith that don't conquer Habasha. Let these people be, because they were not oppressors. They took the Muslims in at one point. So I know that hadith. I don't know if there's a connection to them destroying the Kaaba. If they're going to destroy the Kaaba, shouldn't we conquer them, right? There's a hadith about leaving them alone as a political move. That's true. But there's another connection here. Yeah. Not necessarily. They're not far. They're across the sea. They're not too far in terms of distance. No, is there a man from Habasha who wanted to destroy the Kaaba before? What's his name? Abraha. That's the connection here. As many of the scholars have mentioned, a man came with an army at the behest of an empire from Habasha to destroy the Kaaba. And it was a huge army that the Arabs had to flee because they had no means of resisting him. And he came with the largest animals they ever seen and known, which was an elephant. And he was unable to do it, with no army facing him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed to protect it. But the day that that will is rescinded, that protection is gone because of what the Muslims did themselves, fighting in it, then even a man who's crippled and has nothing to his name will come and tear apart stone by stone, and no one can do anything. It's the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives us signs in these things so we can wake up, so we can realize the connections here, and that true might and power and protection only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not about the size of the army that you're facing down. This man's not even an army. He's someone who's physically crippled, physically deformed, and he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he will take it apart with his pickaxe. It's not going to have some bulldozer or some caterpillar machine or some It's going to be a small pickaxe that he's going to strike it piece by piece and take its treasures. It's the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us to remember that all might and all power only comes from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last sign of the minor signs, and it segues immediately into the major signs as we'll discuss next week, is the appearance of Al-Imam al-Mahdi, the rightly guided one. Al-Mahdi is a title, right? It's not his name. Al-Mahdi means the rightly guided one. And the Prophet ﷺ foretold him in a number of hadith. He said in one hadith, his name is my name and his father's name is my father's name. So his name is what? Muhammad ibn Abdullah or Ahmad ibn Abdullah is also a possibility, as both names are names of the Prophet ﷺ. And in his time there will be peace and justice. He said ﷺ that he will fill the earth with justice and fairness, just as it had been previously filled with injustice and oppression. He will come at a time, he said ﷺ, that there is much infighting amongst the Muslims and no unity. Sounds familiar? He said ﷺ that he will come at a time in which they're fighting one another and none of them are united and they're going through much trials. He said ﷺ, if you are to see him, إِذَا رَأَيْتُمُوهُ فَبَايِعُهُ, then you're to give him allegiance. You're to give him your allegiance, وَلَوْ حَبْوًا عَلَى الثَّلْجِ, even if it means you have to crawl over ice. Because he will be the undisputed leader of the Muslims. And he said, فَإِنَّهُ خَلِيفَةُ اللَّهِ الْمَهْدِي, he is the deputy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here on earth, the rightly guided one. He's going to judge and rule fairly and going to be just and going to distribute wealth and rid the world of injustice and unite the Muslims in a way that they had never been united before. And if you think about it, when's the last time the Muslims were united on a single political leader? It hasn't happened since the time of the Sahaba. Quite literally. Talking about over 1400 years ago. That they were unequivocally undisputable, that it was one single leader. So it's something that the Muslims have desperately needed, and it will come to pass, inshallah, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, something very soon. He said that he will be given bay'ah. The people will approach him at the Kaaba and they will pledge allegiance to him and he will refuse. He will initially refuse and they will force him. They will see the signs, they will see his name obviously. He's also mentioned as having a wide forehead and a long slender nose. So his name in addition to some of his physical description. And he's also described as the closest to the Messenger of Allah ﷺ in his mannerisms and how he acts, in his righteousness, even though he does not resemble him ﷺ in his physical description, but in his mannerisms, how he acts, and how he acts. What's very interesting about that doesn't mean he's some kind of huge scholar. It doesn't mean that he is especially righteous at first. Because there's another hadith which he said, the hadith of Ali radiallahu anhu, he said the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, Al-Mahdi minna Ahlul Bayt. There's another important point I forgot to mention. He's from us, Ahlul Bayt. He's from the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. Through Fatima, through Al-Hasan, the Prophet ﷺ's grandson. He said he's the rightly guided one, will be from our descendants, from Ahlul Bayt. يُصْلِحُهُ اللَّهُ فِي لَيْلَةٍ. Allah will rectify him overnight. What does rectify him mean? Fix him. What does it mean that he will fix him? What's deficient? He wasn't righteous before. He's not some kind of, scholarly person like grows up in the practicing sphere. Allah will fix him overnight and make him the leader of the ummah. And that's something that's super important for you to focus on. If al-Mahdi, the greatest leader since the time of the Sahaba, that will unite this ummah and fix all of its problems and fix the entire world. If he didn't start off religious, then why would you write yourself off? Because you yourself have vices or have problems that you're struggling with, or you don't fit some religious mold that you were told you must fit. Your life is not over yet. You have so much more to accomplish if you just simply make that decision. I want to be a better person. That's all it takes. If al-Mahdi, the greatest Muslim ever since the time of the Sahaba, will be fixed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will not have that background, will not have that history, will not be quote unquote practicing, and this is his destiny, don't you dare write yourself off because you don't have what you consider a proper or just beginning or religious background. Since when was that the rubric? Since when was that the metric? Since when was that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demanded of you? That was never the case. It's something that we do for ourselves. It's a standard that we put for ourselves, and more often than anything, it sets us up for failure. It sets us up to not meet the standard. It's not like it makes us better people when we tell ourselves that. It only pushes us further down. The entire generation of the Sahaba were previous drinkers and murderers and idol worshippers. It was an entire generation of converts who had black histories. But they made the best future, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them the best generation. So don't write yourself off. We have no room for, as an ummah today, for helplessness. We have no room for complacency with where we are. Ya Ruqayya. Yes. It doesn't say he's not Muslim, but he says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rectifies him in overnight. Some of the scholars interpreted it to mean that he will build him up to this role overnight. He's not going to be a leader necessarily. And others said, no, the word that the Prophet ﷺ used is yuslih, which usually means to fix something that's broken, to fix something that is deficient. And Ibn Kathir himself says that means yatubullah alayhi. Allah will cause him to repent from his way of life that he previously lived, that he won't be necessarily righteous. So he's going to be from the descendants of the Prophet ﷺ. Some hadith mentioned that he will be from Medina, he will be from the people of Medina originally. And he will gather the Muslims to fight al-Dajjal. This is similar to the time. So him, Isa alayhi salam, and Dajjal are all simultaneous. Mahdi is the first of them. Which one comes next? Some say Isa, some say Dajjal first. Either way, they are going to occur all simultaneously, very close together. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, when that happens, that Isa alayhi salam will descend upon the white minaret in Damascus. At his time, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, there was no minarets in Damascus, right? Damascus wasn't a Muslim city. And the white minarets of the Umayyad Masjid are the oldest minarets in the city that were built in the time of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. So something that's very interesting. Perhaps it is Masjid al-Umawi. It is a strong possibility based on this description, what many of the scholars have said as well. So he said, Isa Islam will descend upon them, and when he descends upon them and they recognize him from this description that we'll get to next week inshallah, al-Mahdi will push him forward and say, you lead the salah, and he will refuse. He says, this is from the honor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave your ummah, that you are leaders amongst yourselves. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted you guys. I will pray behind you. So a prophet of Allah will pray behind him. He will lead him in prayer. Some of the hadith that describe his times, he said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, يخرج في آخر أمتي المهدي يسقيه الله الغيث وتخرج الأرض نباتها ويعطي المال صحاحا وتكثر الماشية وتعظم الأمة يعيش 7 أو 8. He said, a man will come at the end of my times, he will be rightly guided. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cause the rain to fall in abundance in his time, and the earth will produce much produce, and he will give out money equally. Everyone will get some. How much does everyone get? Everyone gets it equally, but it's not by amount. He gives it out without counting. He said sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in another hadith that he gives out the wealth without counting it. It is something that is handed out to everybody freely. He said in another hadith, يُبْعَثُ عَلَى اخْتِلَافٍ مِنَ النَّاسِ وَزِلْزَالًا or وَزَلَازِلًا فَيَمْلَأُ الْأَرْضُ قِسْطًا وَعَدْلًا كَمَا مُلِئَتْ جَوْرًا وَظُلْمًا. He will come at a time in which there is much difference between the Muslims. They are not united, and so many trials and tribulations. And he will fill the earth with justice and righteousness, just as it had been previously filled with oppression and evil. And then he will distribute the wealth without counting it. In one more hadith, he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in his time, يَأْمُرْ مُنَادِيًا, he will command a caller to announce between all the people. And the announcer will say, مَنْ لَهُ فِي مَالِ حَاجَةٍ, who wants money? Who needs money? Imagine that, someone just in the town square saying, who needs money? Come here. So he said, فَمَا يَقُومُ مِنَ النَّاسِ إِلَّا رَجُلٌ. No one comes to reply except one single man. Everyone's fine. Why? He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that the Muslims' hearts will be filled with ghina, with sufficiency, contentment. Everyone's happy with what they have. No one's trying to one-up one another. Everyone is fully content with what they have, and they've gotten their share already. So no one wants more. As opposed to sometimes you see in today's world, those who have the most want more than anybody else. But he says at that time they'll be self-sufficient. They'll be satisfied finally. So when he comes to announce wealth and giving out wealth, no one will respond except a single man. So he will tell that man, ائت السدان يعني الخازن فقل له إن المهدي يأمرك أن تعطيني مالا. Go to the treasurer and say, al-Mahdi says give me money. Just give him the command. Say al-Mahdi said so and he'll give you. So when he gets there, the man will now begin, the treasurer will begin to pile gold into his lap. Here you go. This is what you wanted, you got it. So the man now is getting it. How do you think he feels? Money's being piled in his lap. without counting, just like, here, take this, and this, and this. So he feels bad about it, actually. He feels a little bit embarrassed. He says to himself, so he says, nadim, he feels regret for coming and requesting. He says, kuntu ashja'a ummati Muhammad nafsa. I was the only person of the whole ummah who wanted more. Like, nobody else came here except me. So he feels bad about it. As they're giving him, he's not happy, saying everybody else went home. No one responded to this call except me. So he feels bad. So he goes back to the treasurer and says, take this money back. Never mind. And the treasurer tells him, no, there's no returns. Once we give it out, we're not taking it back. It's your problem now. To show you like the difference of the time period of what people will be experiences, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this will be 7 or 8 or 9 years of this type of rule. It's not a long time. ثُمَّ لَا خَيْرَ فِي الْعَيْشِ بَعْدَهُ. And then there's no good in life after that. There's only the worst of the worst to come after that, which we'll begin by speaking about, inshallah, next week as we talk about Isa alayhi salam, then Dajjal, and then move on to the other major signs. As you've seen with these times, these signs have not happened yet. But out of the 50 plus signs that we covered, these are the only ones that haven't happened yet, and they are all simultaneous with the major signs. They're not occurring before them, they're occurring during them. Some of them already start, like Isa alayhi salam and Dajjal at the very least, and some of them much later. So, if all the minor signs have already appeared except those that are on the doorstep of the major ones, that alarm bell that we started off speaking about months ago, about how get your act together, it's really ringing at peak volume at this time. There's no option to hit the snooze button any longer. Like, that is not something that's safe for us to do as a people. Because as we'll see when we speak about Dajjal, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, most of mankind present will fail this test. They'll be unable to face the adversity that's going to come with refusing him. They will not be able to face down the glitter and the luxuries that he will present to people at a time when they're starving. Most people will fail. He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in Hadith, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for to get your act together? And he listed a couple of things. I don't know if you remember the Hadith we went through. He said, and one of the things he was waiting for, he said, are you waiting for a Dajjal? For sharrul muntadhir, the worst thing you could wait for. Because once that comes, there will be no one who can possibly get their act together at the moment. It will be what you're upon. It will be exactly as you are now. If you're a 65, you'll be a 65. If you're a 90, right, then you'll be able to produce, you'll be able to act, you'll be able to resist. You have reservoir of information and action and belief to resist against the most difficult of times. If you're 65, you're barely making it now with the trials that you're surrounded by now, then what hope do you have at that time? It's not something that you can look forward to. It's not something that you can bank on. Can you bank on your faith now? Can you bank on your deeds now? Can you bank on your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now? So let's not wait for some specific sign, for some especially catastrophic turn of events, because it doesn't even have to be all of that. The Prophet ﷺ told us, for some people it will just be illness. It will be loss. It will be some kind of specific tribulation just specific to them. Nothing of these epic end time signs. It's just something that they went through now that breaks them because they don't have a reservoir of faith from before that now they can bank on in hard times. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fortify our faith. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be on the right side of things whether we witness these events or not. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us a means of uplifting this ummah and guiding others to His deen. Sallallahu wa baraka Sayyidina Muhammad wa sahbihi wa sallam. Are there any questions? We could take a couple quickly. Go ahead, Dunya. Well, that's why I ended the way I ended it, which is like all you could do, all that's directly in front of you, is to make sure you're fortifying your own faith, you're building it. And whether you witness these times or not, you'll be okay. Because you're fortifying your faith. You're not waiting for those times. And you pray for Allah you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for well-being, for salama, for protection, because that's the only route. But it's not that these times are void of heroes or good times, right? There's as we'll come to the Dajjal, there's people who stand up to him. They're the minority, but they make it, right? There's people who are going to be with Isa alayhi salam. There's people, we heard that hadith about the conquest of Constantinople, where he said a third of the army will run and they'll never be forgiven by Allah. A third will die as shaheed and they'll be the best of shuhada in the sight of Allah. And a third will be granted victory. They will never go through a tribulation ever again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect them. They're still alive. But nothing that afflicts them, nothing that they face down of these other things that we just heard, they will never falter again after that moment. If you could show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a strongly sincere moment, devotion, epic conviction and sacrifice, maybe He'll do that for you now, where He stamps your heart. You're never going back. Didn't He do that to people plenty of times? Didn't the Prophet ﷺ say, لا يضر عثمان ما فعل بعد اليوم? When Uthman was piling the charity, answering the call over and over, he said, nothing will happen to Uthman after today. He's good. He's still alive. Bad things are still going to happen, but his faith will be secured by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can perform good, you can show devotion, you can show conviction and commitment and consistency, such that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stamps you with that. You will never falter. You will always be saved. Things will go bad. Doesn't mean pain won't happen. Doesn't mean fear won't exist. But your faith will be protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all that matters. He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he taught us to say, وَلَا تَجْعَلْ مُصِيبَتَنَا فِي دِينِنَا, and don't make our calamity in our faith. We don't want calamities at all, but they're bound to happen. As long as they're not in our faith, we'll suffer through it. We don't seek these things. We don't encourage them or wish for them upon ourselves or others. But because they're bound to happen anyway, we ask Allah, do not allow them to occur in our faith. If anything falters, let it be my health, let it be my wealth, let it be my family, let it be everything, let it be this physical body, but never this deen. That I commit to this deen till the very last moment. That's all that matters. So, the tons of people that will die in the midst of all of this, death isn't the end. Death is only the beginning. That's the whole point of this entire series, isn't it? So the tons of people that will die in the midst of this, it's not about preserving life in and of itself, even though that is one of our goals and what the Sharia calls to. But before that, and as a primary goal, to preserving our faith and make sure that when this happens, when people are running left and right, when the warfare comes to every single household, as he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I need to make sure my faith is intact. I need to make sure that I make the right decisions as pleasing to my Creator. That's the number one goal. Then I'll worry about my physical safety and my family safety. Those are goals as well. But they're only secondary to the protection of my faith, that I exit this world with my purpose fulfilled. And now is relatively, as difficult as it is for people now, it's relatively easy compared to then. Imagine telling someone at that time, try to read Quran or seek knowledge or go to the masjid or pray sunnah or fast sunnah fast or pray qiyam al-layl. There's no chance. You build a reservoir of it now so that you have something to bank on later. You have an appeal before your Creator, and inshallah He will save you and preserve you. Go ahead. They'll never catch me. Oh, I thought you meant like drafted in the U.S. Army. I'm too old, so it's fine. I don't know why you guys are laughing. You're still in the draft age, so joke's on you. Girls too, ladies too. They draft everybody, so joke's on all of you. I think the maximum age is like 28, something like that. Yeah, joke's on all of you. Yeah, the old jokes are funny until now, huh? I'm sorry, what was your... Oh, yeah, if you get drafted... sorry. If you get drafted in an Islamic system, which has happened throughout history, where the Khalifa, for example, or the ruler of this town says, I need every able-bodied man, and they must answer. So it is sinful to reject that as one of the powers that the Khalifa or a proper Islamic ruler would have. In absence of a proper Islamic ruler, it's not really something that's relevant, but he has the powers to demand that a certain contingent of people, like everybody in this village, like it's being attacked, he says every able-bodied male must join. That's something he does have the power to do. It's sinful to refuse. I don't think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think it's equal to tawalli min al-zahf. Tawalli min al-zahf is the armies are facing one another, they're in active warfare, and someone just runs. Right? They're not allowed to do that. It doesn't apply to females anyway. This is just for males, so there's that. So if they're facing one another and they're in active warfare, then it is forbidden for those that are in that situation to run. It's something that's haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِلَّا مُتَحَرِّفًا لِقِتَالٍ أَوْ مُتَحَيِّزٍ إِلَى فِئَةٍ, except somebody it's a war tactic, right? It's a feigned retreat, as they call it. Or it is to join reinforcements. Like there's a tactic behind it. It's not running out of fear for my life. Why are you here in the first place, right? It's something, it's for the sake of the deen, it's for the sake of lifting oppression. And the ideal Muslim, the pinnacle of faith is that you're sacrificing everything on the line. So why would you run? It makes no sense. But like I said, it's something that people have done throughout history. They were forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it is one of the largest sins in Islam. Anybody else? Go ahead, Sarah. Oh, if you guys are scared, wait till we get to Dajjal. They'll no longer be Muslim at that point. They will renounce their faith. Joining a Dajjal is professing him as your Lord and accepting him. So those who join him, there's two options at that time. There's three options. People who run away and flee. Prophet ﷺ described them as living in the wilderness, being skin on bones, because there'll be nothing to eat. They'll have to run. So there's those who run, there's those who are killed by him, facing him, and then there's those who believe in him. There's no fourth option. They accept him as their Lord and they accept his religion that he's going to be pushing on people. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. We should be seeking protection from the Dajjal a minimum of 5 times a day at the end of our prayer. Right? The dua that the Prophet ﷺ taught us at the end of the salah. Let me get on this side quickly so I could be gender equal. Yeah. No, it's a great question. The Prophet said, so those 3 sons of the Khalifa that fight near the Kaaba, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, none of them will be victorious. All of them will fail, meaning none of them will get to the seat of power that they're seeking. And in fact, the Mahdi, there's some narrations that mention the Mahdi is fleeing from them because they're going to see the Mahdi as a contender. They're going to realize that people are flocking around him and he will refuse initially. He doesn't want, and this is a very important point because there's a lot of people who claim Mahdis all throughout history, right? And they gained a following. And people began to follow them. They said, I'm the Mahdi. The Mahdi himself will never say that. People will force him to accept it. Right? And the most controversial of them is when they seized the Masjid al-Haram in 1979, 46 years ago. A group of people, hundreds of people, they come to Masjid al-Haram, the Kaaba, in 1979. They sneak in weapons in boxes that they said were for janazah. They pull out these weapons and they take the Kaaba hostage for 2 weeks. Yeah, you can look it up on Wikipedia. So they take the Kaaba hostage for 2 weeks, killing people who came close. And they said, we have the Mahdi. And the hadith says he will be given bay'ah at the Kaaba. We're at the Kaaba, everyone's giving him bay'ah right now. And you must succeed to his rule, because he's the righteous that's been foretold at the end of times. And they chose the year 1400, the beginning of Muharram 1400, because they felt that was so significant. They concocted all these different details that made it look better, but it was forced. It wasn't by coincidence as the Mahdi will come. It's by not coincidence, but the will of Allah will happen naturally, is what I'm trying to say. No, they forced all these details. His name was Muhammad ibn Abdullah. He had a wide forehead. He had a slender nose. And he was chosen by a group of people. And they were not just like random fanatics or crazy people. Tons of them were students of knowledge from the Islamic University of Medina. Tons of them were the students of a lot of the major scholars of the time. They were deluded, they made a huge mistake, and they led to tons of bloodshed. Hundreds of people were killed. There's no final count, the number of people who were killed. The Saudi government had to end up getting the French special forces to come and coordinate how to get them out. They ended up flooding the masjid and electrocuting most people and throwing in a bunch of grenades, and they eventually gave up when they saw the man that they claimed was al-Mahdi shot in front of their face. That's kind of where people stood down. And then the leader of it, which was his cousin, he was the main leader. The leader of the man who they claimed was the Mahdi was actually his cousin. His name was Juhayman. And him and about 100 others who were the main leaders, they were taken and executed thereafter. How did we get here? Oh yeah, so the 3 people, the three sons of kings or the sons of a king or of a khalifa that will fight over rulership, none of them will succeed. And he will escape them. They'll be chasing him down in some sort of fashion. He will escape to Mecca, And there the people will recognize him and force him to take bay'ah, that you are al-Mahdi, you're the one who's foretold, and he will refuse and they will force him at that place. And when that happens, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a large army will be assembled to fight him. People will see him as a threat. Look at how the people react today when their chairs are being threatened, or their government is being threatened, or their oppression is being threatened. So he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a huge army will be sent his way to seize him, to kill him. And then when it crosses a desert on their way to Mecca and Medina, the desert will swallow them. And when that happens, all the Muslims will then flock around him and will say, this is actually al-Mahdi. It's not one of those other crazy people that have happened before or claim to be al-Mahdi like happened in other countries without mentioning names. Well, we mentioned Saudi Arabia, right? It's not fair. So in Sudan, it happened before, in other places where it's, hey, break on the gas pedal at this point. Whereas like people, it happened in India, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, for example, where people claimed to be al-Mahdi, gathered a huge following, and it was always disastrous for the Muslims. It was never something beneficial. And they're one of many Mahdis claimed to our history. So people will be hesitant, of course, but when this army is swallowed by the desert on their way to seize him, that's when the entire Muslim Ummah will recognize, and then they will begin to join him bit by bit, till the entire Muslim Ummah is united around him as the single leader. Ruqayya? Then we'll bounce back this way. All right, great. I love when that happens. Initially, no. He'll never claim that he's the Mahdi. If someone you see is saying, I'm the Mahdi, that's red flag number one. It's the only one you need. It's not the real Mahdi. Hey, I'm the Mahdi, subscribe, like, and share my YouTube page. That's not the Mahdi, right? I'm sure there's some of those. I've never seen it, but... Say it again? Yeah, but my dad's name is not Abdullah. I'm also not from Saudi Arabia, and I'm also not from Ahlul Bayt, so... Yes? All right. It was funny at first, but... White Ford, Pennsylvania plates, LZV 3620. White Ford, LZV 3620. Please move your car, thank you. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was from India, and he was in the late 1800s. At first he claimed to be al-Mahdi, then he claimed to be Isa, and then he claimed to be a new prophet. And he created a huge movement that has tons of adherents till today. You ever heard of Qadianis? So he's from the Qadiani movement. His name is Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani. He's from a city called, or a town called Qadian. He created a whole new religion basically. And it was during the time where the British were colonizing in India. So it's not a coincidence that one of his main the main new tenets of his faith, one of the main new updates to Islam that he came with supposedly was there's nothing called jihad anymore. How convenient, right? When the British are colonizing the land. So, and his family has many ties that you could easily see and read up on the most basic of search sites, many ties to the British as well, most likely an agent. He goes back and forth doing da'wah in India, unfortunately misguides tons of people that have now spread all over the world. That's significant movement. They have some of the oldest masajid here in America. I forgot the name of the scholar, but there was a famous Indian scholar who challenged him to a debate, and they went back and forth, and he said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala humiliate the one between us who's lying. And they both agreed to that, and not long after that, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad died on the toilet using the bathroom. So that's also interesting. Say it again? They were trying to just undermine the Muslims in India because they were colonizing the land. This is right before they divided it into Pakistan, Bangladesh, and modern-day India. Back then, it was none of those things. It was just one swath of land. So they had to divide religious groups. They had to create new ones. They had to make sure that everybody saw the other as the enemy, despite living in the same land for centuries, and stir old hatreds and ethnic wars. And they did a great job of that because it continues till today. Yeah. Those are the Ahmadis, yeah. Yeah, you can't pray there. That's not... I don't know. I've never been there. Yeah, no, this is a completely different deen. It's not even like... We can't even agree to disagree. It's like the whole other prophet. So, it's not how it works. Kind of nullifies the whole Muhammad Rasulullah part. Any other questions? I hope not. Inshallah, we'll continue with the advent of Isa ibn Maryam, the second coming of Isa alayhi salam next week. And there'll definitely be some crossover with the Dajjal, but we'll probably give it Dajjal his own session just to go into details. Then after that, the remainder of the signs don't have a huge amount of details, so we'll probably cover them all out in a couple of weeks, and then we'll finally begin with the actual advent of the Day of Judgment, what that will look like, how the sequence of events will be, and the different important points that we need to know about that. When you go through the Quran, scholars have estimated almost a third of it is just referencing the Day of Judgment. Another third of it is stories of the prophets. And another third of it is the names and attributes of Allah, who Allah is. I know that makes 3/3, so it's the whole thing that because barely any of his ahkam, halal and haram. Less than 400 or 500 verses out of over 6,000 are about what you should do or don't do. The other 6,100, I think there's 6,600 something, or 6,000, in the 6,000 something, over 5,500 verses of the Quran, over 85% or 90% is who Allah is and who He's not, what He does and what He doesn't do. The Day of Judgment and stories of the prophets. Because that by itself is the fuel for you to accept the 300-400 verses of what to do or don't do. So it's super important that we tune in and lock into this last part. I know it's been super interesting leading up to this, and that's by design, hopefully. But inshallah, when we get to the actual description of the Day of Judgment, this is where you need to lock in more than ever. See yourself there. See yourself experiencing these things and wondering how you will fare through all of this. Because it's not a mystery. It's what me and you are doing right now. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala resurrect us with the righteous and the prophets and the martyrs and make our hereafter a return home, a homecoming to our Lord and our Creator, as opposed to like that as the Prophet ﷺ described of a runaway slave that is returning for punishment. Sallallahu barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Subhanaka wa bihamdika.